This is Amiable Arguments. This is Amiable Arguments.
Cheers.
Jen.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Amiable Arguments. We've really just put together a very impromptu podcast today. I didn't think I'd be doing one today, but my friend Harry was coming round, who you may remember from that jolly good podcast, Death to the West, Long Live the West.
Very first one, if I recall correctly.
Very, very first one. So I think that, the reason we've set this up, isn't it? We're just going to have a bit of a special one-off about the Jubilee.
Indeed. Very impromptu. I'm already 2 units in.
Yes, he's got some good old British cider. I've got some good old British ale. And we're just going to have a jolly good talk about everything. So, Harry, 70 years since Her Majesty, the coronation. Are you happy about it?
In all honesty, I'm delighted. I wasn't thinking about it at all until the run-up, until like a couple of months ago. And frankly, I'm surprised at how chuffed I am about it. I wish I'd made more proper preparations. I'm gonna go to a fair tomorrow, and I'm gonna try and I have to work on Saturday morning, but I am going to still finagle my way into some kind of event. But it's one of those things where even if you leave aside all the monarchy, which I do think is worth thinking about and why we're having the discussion today, I think it's nice just to have a reason to celebrate after just the doom and gloom of the past couple of years. I think it's a very encouraging thing to be seeing people celebrating, and also in light of the discourse about the nation, it's very refreshing that instead of seeing people trying to topple statues and black flags and communist flags and anarchist flags, you're instead seeing people waving union flags and talking about wishing each other a happy Jubilee and talking about their plans. I think we all needed this.
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you look at Regent Street and all the British, the good old Union flags over there, we are apparently on the verge of 1930s Germany again. So I do think we have to be careful about enjoying ourselves a little too much over the coming weeks.
Although I have heard, I can't remember from whom, but I have heard actually that in a way, there's that old adage that all Puritanism is the sneaking suspicion that someone out there is having a good time. And I think that is like a bit of a layover within our own culture. Maybe it's a bit too much of a generalization to say the Anglophonic or European culture in general, but I do think that is a current, certainly of British English culture, of there being a suspicion of just a celebration or a feeling positive about something. And so I think it's ironically a very negative but very British thing to do is to make an incredibly inappropriate comparison just to try and rain on everyone's parade a little bit.
Yes, although having said that, I don't think we are going to have much rain because the weather looks quite lovely, and I wouldn't be very British of me if we didn't mention the weather at least once.
No, so. not at all. Monday I was supposed to be I was invited to a work barbecue, and I just knew it was going to be god awful, and sure enough, it was a Monday where it was torrential rain. And it was just the satisfaction of just knowing that there's a whole bunch of busybodies out there getting soaked and having their prosecco watered down by rain is just makes me absolutely, gives me terrific Schadenfreude.
Well, you absolute sadist. So okay, so this has all come about obviously because it's a 70-year anniversary of Her Majesty Elizabeth II, ascending to the throne. The coronation back from 1952. that's unprecedented. There hasn't been a single monarch in British history that has ever.
In world history, she's
Well, Louis the XIV of France
was he?
reigned for over 70 years as
okay.
well. So it has happened in the world, but he came to the throne at the age of 4. So I think he was cheating a bit.
Yeah,
But,
okay, that is a bit unfair. She can't really catch up there. But even so, I do know, and I am correct in this, that of contemporary monarchies, she is the longest serving. She, thanks to ex-emperor Akihito abdicating, narrowly avoided that, and then the Thai king. I can't remember.
That's a great title in and of itself, the Thai King.
The Thai king. I mean, he must have been called Rama at something. Apologies to any Thai people listening, because I know Thailand holds their monarchy in very great esteem. I don't mean him any ill. I think his jazz is very good. But it's I just can't quite summon his name. But he was close to being the longest serving monarch until he unfortunately passed.
Yeah.
So it looks like we're set to be a record holder, at least as far as contemporary monarchies are concerned. God, it had to be the bloody French, didn't it? Yeah.
Well, he was a successful monarch in his own way, in an absolute sort of way. But enough about Louis XIV. So Elizabeth, 70 years of rule. I mean, I've not quite looked at the statistics, but it must be. I mean, it's so many prime ministers have come and gone during her reign. So many successive governments.
Who have we got? I mean, it was.
Well, started with Churchill.
She came in with Churchill's second term.
Yes.
So Churchill, Macmillan, Hume, Eden. This is not necessarily in the exact order.
Wilson,
but Callaghan,
Thatcher, Blair,
Major.
Oh yeah, I forgot about him.
I think we all wish we could. Brown, the Coalition, Cameron Mark II, the Maybots, and Bojo, and then maybe looks like probably Keir Starmer next. But yeah, outlived all of them. So have spoken with all of them in her palaces. Or even just, and even if we move outside of the United Kingdom, the fact that she's outlived and outserved Mandela and Castro, and as I said, the King of Thailand, the Emperor of Japan, the former Eastern Bloc. She's outlived all of it.
Well, that brings me to a really interesting point, because I actually just quickly wanted to read an excerpt. I've got here, folks, a play that I'm a very, very big fan of. It's called King Charles III by Mike Bartlett. And not to start it with a sort of negative slant, but the play is set, for those who don't know, in a sort of pseudo-historical future, in which after Her Majesty passes away, King Charles III becomes king. And there is a really good little monologue here from the Prime Minister character, Mr. Evans, in the when he's having a conversation with the newly proclaimed King Charles, talking about, and Charles is reluctant to give his royal assent to a piece of legislation, and he's basically saying, and it's a piece of legislation that would prohibit the freedom of the press. And Charles basically says, nowhere during her reign did my mother ever have to sign such an awful bill. Nothing was ever put to her quite as evil as this. And Mr. Evans says this, he says, I do agree, for in her time she faced far greater revolution when she lost an empire. Granted that the law on homosexuality be changed, she oversaw the altercation from the unions, mines and factories that stood for generations to a world that Thatcherated, Reaganized, did place a profit higher value than the pride belonging to the man who travels day by day upon the Clapham omnibus. And through all this, when laws arrived from those prime ministers she hated, doing things of which I'm sure she never would have approved, she still did sign, respected all the votes, empowering those elect To make the law, she always signed. She always gave assent. And I think within that is truly the heart of why I've grown. I've not always been a monarchist, but why I've grown to appreciate it over time, because I think the monarchy gives us consistency. It gives a sense of, it adds to the national character of the country, and we are the United Kingdom. It is in our name. Our anthem is God Save the King or God Save the Queen, dependent on which monarch is reigning. And so it is such a fundamental part of our national character.
It's interesting, actually, just acknowledging that we come here now as two people who are lowercase p and m pro-monarchy, but both of us have for a time in our lives been Republican, have actually wanted to see the monarchy dissolved. And yeah, I would certainly agree with that statement, that sentiment about the consistency of the monarchy and a kind of uniqueness, because what I find fascinating is if you look at both our mythology and our monarchy, what's interesting about it is that it's not unique in the sense that you have monarchies in the Benelux countries and in
Scandinavian
countries, as I said, Japan, Thailand, Brunei, and of course
the United States,
the various Queen Oprah, and the various different emirs and emirates. But what's really fascinating is that when people think of the monarchy, a monarchy, and when it's discussed, and I'm sure you'll find this in I've certainly seen this in video essays around the world, they always use the example of Britain. It's almost seen as the ubiquitous, and maybe that's partly the thing of that kingdom is in our official title, that you don't, even when we abbreviate it, Denmark is a kingdom, it's the Kingdom of Denmark.
Yes.
Sweden is a kingdom as well, it's the Kingdom of Sweden, but people just say Sweden, they just say Denmark. Whereas we are always the UK, the United Kingdom. It's really important that we almost lead with that. And that's similar with our mythology, in the fact that if you look at the things of, like, with George and the Dragon, for instance, of how that's or the Arthurian legends, is that's a mythology that gets used to be the fantasy tropes of pretty much almost the entire world, which is a very interesting privilege afforded to us, and that might have been as a result of our colonial legacy, but perhaps it's also just due to a kind of idiosyncratic feature, that there's something inexplicable about it, that there's, I don't know, a suchness of that there's a charm of the particularity of British Englishness that people find across the world find at least novel.
Well, look at the reopening of Parliament a few weeks ago, when obviously Her Majesty wasn't there. It was Charles who went in her place, but still the opening of the Parliament, the fact that the King isn't allowed in the Commons. He invites the politicians to go to the House of Lords, where he is welcome, because the Commons is not for the King, it's for the people. And so, but these are all little things. And so then you have all of the spoken words that are affirmed every single time. It's all built upon, these things of tradition and ritual, and they all have symbolic meaning. And I think what's special about things like that and things like tradition is they can't be rationally constructed.
No.
They are born out of a time that we're not part of, but it has been passed down to us. And I think there's something really interesting in the fact that if I were to start my own country from scratch, I wouldn't want a king. I would start it as a republic. Having said that, we do have a monarchy, and I would not wish to get rid of it.
Me neither. And I think it's interesting because because it seems to be for whatever reason, and I think it would probably take an anthropologist or probably better still someone with an expertise in psychology to understand, but
Or a commentator off the internet.
or a commentator off the internet. Indeed, that matches all of those, as we know.
Yes.
It is to understand why we, as people, we seem to need someone to hold a kind of symbolic office, which is the reason why I'm not a Republican now, at least as far as the UK is concerned. Because in truth, if we were to either peacefully or otherwise remove the monarchy and become the United Republic of Great Britain, if we were able to keep the union together, which would be doubtful since it is a union of crowns, that then we would just that Buckingham Palace would become just the presidential palace, and instead of taking tea with the Queen, who's come from this illustrious line, supposedly illustrious line, that you instead will just have someone elected to that symbolic role. And at the end of the day, it's still ceremony, it's still ritual, it's still just someone who in truth is no better than anybody else, but fulfilling the role of being the living representative of the nation. But the difference is we just keep swapping them out and giving us the illusion that that person has real significance and power and authority on the national world stage. And when we take that into consideration, I really fail to see how that is an improvement on just having this family who have a connection spanning hundreds of years now to that office.
Yes, it's funny because so let's talk about the Queen herself.
Yeah, no, it's
Because
it's her big day.
It's her big day. That's what we're all here for. I suppose the most important thing, well, not the most important thing, but if we're talking about from the start of her reign, is that when she was born, it would have been inconceivable that she would have ever been queen. Because obviously it wasn't her father who was supposed to ascend to the throne. It was supposed to have been Edward VIII. So she was in line to the throne, but she certainly wasn't even the third, in line to the throne. Obviously, Edward was expected to go on and have his own children, and that was supposed to be the royal line. And then so Elizabeth's father, George VI, became king after the abdication crisis. And so it's just really funny that I think that's where we should start. She was a woman who wasn't born to be queen. She was never the first in line. She was never, and yet through this sense of duty and perseverance and service, she's turned out to be, I would say, one of our most successful monarchs.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's even in that playbook that you have there. I believe, because I've seen it on stage. I believe there is a passage, a line, in which one of the characters talks about how she presided over this country at a time when it basically receded from being the global hegemon. And I'll join the chorus of many people who say, I actually think that's a good thing, because for the well intentions that there may have been at certain points, it was not a position that we held by popular vote. It was a position that we held by the old law of might is right, And I think
I would argue we still live in that world.
yeah, no, I think in a certain extent we do still live in that world, but with with the current global hegemon being America, but then even so, thank God it is America and neither Russia nor China, the only other contenders. But even so, it's the fact that the point that I'm making is and the point that the play was making is the receding from that role, going back to being a country of just these isles and not being the de facto ruler of the world, either directly or indirectly. It's hard to preside over that and not make it look like a massive defeat. But the fact is she did. And the fact that she is still, and I find it amazing, she is still so well received in the West Indies and in Africa and in and it's really telling, for instance, that when there is the popular call for reparations now, it's almost always made in the presence of Prince William or the Duchess of Cambridge. I don't think anyone quite feels comfortable bringing it up in her presence because she has handled that transition, that very difficult transition, with such dignity and stoicism.
Well, I think she's always at the heart of her mandate. She's felt very strongly about the Commonwealth, the ties that bind the Commonwealth. And, she fundamentally believes, from the best as I can tell, because one of the most important things about her as well is that she's actually always been quite a private person.
Yes.
Unlike other constitutional monarchs that we've had that have openly had favourite political parties, like Victoria, in the case between the Tories and who were favoured over the Liberals, transparently so. The whole nation knew it. No one... the Queen takes a much more reserved approach to that sort of thing. It's very famous that obviously one of her favourite prime ministers to have worked with was Harold Wilson. And I think that says a great deal as well. And in turn, Harold Wilson came to have a great appreciation for her.
Which I think really speaks to the uniqueness of our experience, because I can't imagine how. Perhaps I'm reading too much into this, but especially after Attlee and all, but I feel it must have been a frightening prospect for Elizabeth to be met with such a left-wing prime minister from in practice, much more a social democrat, but in theory and rhetoric, a socialist, given that...
Who had been to the Soviet Union.
Who had been to the Soviet Union, which, as many people will know, was a state founded with the murder of her extended family. Now, granted, she never met them, but even so, I think if anyone was told that they'd have to have tea and be nice to someone who followed a creed that led to the death of members of your own family, you would be extremely on edge.
Well, when she ascended to the throne, Stalin was still alive. Who did take part in the Russian Revolution, a big part in it. So it's it's within living memory. That is quite an interesting point.
But then it's as I said, it speaks to just the uniqueness of our experience, that we could have people from such different worlds find commonality within each other. And I think one of the reasons why I would argue for the preservation of the monarchy, as exemplified at its best by Her Majesty, is the fact that it exposes, in a way, just the terrific silliness of celebrity in a wonderful, tongue-in-cheek, ironic way, because it's amazing how we've managed this as a nation, where our whole legal system, our whole status as a nation is all predicated on the idea that this lineage of families is by right of birth better than we are. And what I love is absolutely nobody believes it.
No, of course we don't.
It's
We don't.
wonderful. And that's part of the reason why I think it's superior to say to say a presidential model, or because the thing is that the celebrities we're fronted with, or the leaders of cults of personality, so-called thought leaders, is that they almost actually lead with the whole thing of I am like you, I am a man of the people, I'm a woman of the people, I'm so relatable, but all the while there's all of this effort to try and actually make you think, no, I am better than you. And it gets in your head. It messes with your status. Whereas what's wonderful is that we all play this absurd pantomime, and we're all in on the joke in a way.
Well, let me ask you this question. Who do you think, between these two individuals, cares more on average about the British public? Her Majesty the Queen or Boris Johnson?
The Queen.
You didn't even have to think about it.
It's demonstrably simple, and it is fascinating of how if there was a presidential position,
President Johnson.
Yeah, I think he'd vastly prefer that to being a prime minister, because as it's abundantly clear to everybody, this is not a man who is here to try and change the nation for the better. He is not a public servant. It's an ego trip. He is purely doing this because he loves the idea of the Johnson premiership and making his mark on history, even if it's more like a skid mark. But aside from that, I think that again the wonderful irony, and I think irony is fundamental in understanding the British and the English character, is that the Queen, in being ostensibly a figure of immense privilege and power and majesty, that we even refer to her as such, is actually a public servant.
But these are the vows. It's to be queen or king is a vow of service. It's not about, it used to be about right to rule, but we don't talk in those terms anymore, because I don't even think that the most ardent monarchist would be an advocate for absolute monarchy. We had that. They were called Tories. They lived in the 1600s, but we don't have that anymore. It's not how we govern ourselves. But also, I think I would be remiss, though, not to bring up within this podcast the fact that it's not infallible. There are still many, many people out there who are dissatisfied with the monarchy. And I think particularly, obviously, the elephant in the room is with Prince Andrew.
Yeah, it had to come up.
And she has not, I think, come down as hard on him as many people would have liked to have done. And I think that's very, very interesting, especially in the absolute twilight years of her life, that she might have made a decision that could be seen as careless and irresponsible in this way. That's not to say that she's always got it right. I could label other times during her rule. Many people were very dissatisfied with the way that she dealt with the tragic death of Diana.
Yeah,
People were very unhappy with her during that time.
I mean, I find it fascinating personally, and I think it's a result of my age, of being born after it. I think Diana was a by all accounts, seemed to be a lovely person, and also I almost lost my train of thought. And but by all accounts, a lovely person, and no question she was hard done by. But by the same token, I think there is a very peculiar fever around her, where she's sort of seen as a kind of, and maybe this is a reflection of just our absence of a coherent religious or philosophical system that we all abide by now, that we find makeshift saints and martyrs where there aren't. And I know for full well that if were this podcast to reach hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, that there would be
please people,
inshallah, that there would be people who, upon me hearing that, would be sharpening impractically large swords, because she even now, is it 30 years now? Like
yeah, I mean, it was what, 96, 97?
Yeah, so ironically, my birth year.
Yes.
Not that I had anything to do with it.
Coincidence? I think not.
That is still so emotive for so many people, and they are caught up in that. But even in my place of work, I found it really peculiar when I was bringing it up in the break room about the Jubilee, of just how a couple of the people were really adamantly anti-monarchy. And what I found fascinating was, obviously, Andrew came up, and I think the case of Andrew does raise, I think, the best cases against the monarchy for some time, because, I mean, it's still not decided yet, but at this current point, it almost seems as if he is above the law.
But I would counteract with that.
If I just may finish, finish the thing. But what I found fascinating was that in the break room, although that was a topic, the thing that people were far more upset about, and what they had a conspiratorial mind for, was the idea that the royals wanted Diana assassinated. And I think I could give my reasons of why that's totally ridiculous, or you could check out a beautiful sketch by Mitchell and Webb about the assassination of Princess Diana, which exposes beautifully of how it makes absolutely no sense, if you're worried about this person being too popular, to kill her whilst she is young and beautiful and crystallize her in people's memories forever, than rather just let her raise the illegitimate bastard of a millionaire mogul.
Well, checkmate. But I would say in retort to that, look, there is undoubtedly, even I would admit, that the Prince Andrew thing has entirely come from a position of privilege. A privilege that he does not deserve, is not entitled to, and has made him quite untouchable under the law.
Oh, you don't think he was instrumental in facing off the Argentine menace in the Falklands?
You know what?
Sweating, blood and sweat.
It doesn't sweat.
Just the blood. Just the blood. Sorry, just the blood.
But the thing is, right? I mean, look at Partygate. As much as a bit of a farce, I don't care. I just don't care. But...
Sorry, quick side note. The Minister of Ethics was taking a karaoke machine into Downing Street. Like, that's something out of Yes Minister. I love it.
No, totally.
So please go on.
But, this is privilege will always exist.
Yes.
You cannot abolish privilege.
Yes.
I'm sorry, you just can't.
No, you can't.
Because in order for societies to work, that require hierarchies.
And privilege is relative. We are privileged, we are poorer than a great many people, but we're also far richer than a great many people.
Yes, and so I don't think you can abolish privilege. I think that we should absolutely work to create greater accountability throughout our hierarchical system, but I don't think that finding corruption within hierarchy is a reason to abolish hierarchy.
Yeah.
But it's just very interesting that people, Andrew was never in line to be king.
No.
Andrew is not in line to be king. Never will be king. And so it's disgusting what he did. And I think I can say he did do it. I don't think that's a controversial thing. Andrew, if you disagree with that, feel free to fight me in court.
Oh, I would love him to come on the podcast. That would be terrific.
It is quite hot in here as well, so we'll see if he gets any sweat out of him. But the
pizza.
Yeah, express. Anyway, right. So what I was going to say though was that look, Boris has done some awful stuff, and he's getting no accountability for Partygate. Is that a reason to abolish the prime ministership? Think about this. How many bad members of the royal family have we had? And how many bad people have we had in our system of legislative government? How many bad prime ministers have we had over here? More than good ones.
And even when you get out of the system of government, of just the amount of people who can be, just absurdly amoral within the world of business or within religion, within the church. Now, this is not like a whataboutism, because I do think that he should be held accountable and have the book thrown at him.
As do I.
And it's, as I said before, I think if there is an argument to be made against the monarchy, is just if it's really still palatable, if it can let people get away with such. But then again, I don't think it is outside the realm of our tradition to maintain the monarchy whilst still holding him accountable, for that is where Magna Carta came from. It came from the fact that uniquely, perhaps not entirely uniquely, because I don't know everything about all of the world, but certainly,
I do.
But certainly as far as Europe is concerned, there was never an earlier statement that the king is not above the law.
No.
And so I think you can still hold him accountable by that sentiment.
By invoking
that.
The spirit of Magna Carta, at the very minimum. Yeah, no, I totally agree. But I feel like we've made Andrew sweat long enough, so let's move on to...
But I would like I'd say just one final thing, actually, because it'd be nice to go on to some of the more positives, but one thing as well...
Of Andrew.
Look on the bright side. But more looking at the with the whole, when people do talk about monarchy, of thinking about the alternatives, and perhaps, and I'd be willing to concede, perhaps it is an irrational, outdated sentiment, but I think part of the reason why, to me and to many other British people, the idea of abolishing the monarchy doesn't sit right, is because we did have an experiment with it. We did have a period of republicanism under Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell, and that led to what, if any Irish listeners will know, by far the worst treatment of Ireland under British rule that had ever been practiced.
I would disagree.
You disagree? Okay.
I would fundamentally disagree with the idea that we have practiced republicanism in this country. Cromwell was not the head of a republic. He was the head of a military dictatorship.
That is still... But
he abolished Parliament.
That's not a democratic republic, but that is a republic. Republic, by definition, is just a system without a monarchy. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is certainly not democratic, but it is a republic because it is ruled by a president and not a monarch. And
But he was a Lord Protector.
he's a Lord Protector, no, still, but the point being, still not a monarch. Now, there will be contemporary Republicans who will say it's a poor example, and I did begin with the throat clearer that maybe this is an irrational thing, but I think it still serves that the brutal memory of that, because in Ireland it led to the most appalling systems of pillage and genocides, perhaps that Britain had ever inflicted upon Ireland. But then also domestically, it was the period of heightened Puritanism, and our theatres, the very the very cathedrals of our language and our culture were being persecuted, and just our sacred traditions were being destroyed. In fact, if you remember,
They are being now, and we still have a monarchy.
They are being now, and I think it maybe in some ways people can stand to have a little lesson about that past. I remember there being an anecdote of when I can't remember if it was Wilson or Attlee, but it was certainly one of the two. For the sake of argument, I'll say it was Attlee, where when they got
because he had a very nice tash.
well, actually, he doesn't. Whoever it was doesn't come across well in this, but I'll just go for him because it was earlier. Was that when Labour took charge, and they took charge of the Foreign Office, there was a painting of a Nepalese prince in the Foreign Office, and they decided this doesn't reflect our values very well. We want to move away from the colonial legacy, so we'll replace it. So they took down the picture of the Nepalese prince, and instead they put up a picture of Oliver Cromwell, because they figured, it's a secular Republican. I think that says it better.
Secular?
So I don't know why I said secular. He's not remotely secular. He's a theocrat. Sorry, just basically a Republican, a bit more egalitarian than the comparison. That might have been just the cider talking, but anyway, and all they really achieved in doing is greatly offending the Nepalese, because they actually liked their prince being honoured. And then it just so happened that the very first delegation that they received in the Foreign Office was from Ireland. And they were very upset to see old Ollie Crom staring them down.
That's classic. That's...
But you raise an interesting point then with the whole that the current the rise of intersectionalism in this country does bear some interesting parallels to when Puritanism also took charge.
Well, my point really is, this has happened under her reign. Could she have done something about it?
Oh, could she or should she?
No, could she?
Okay,
Okay,
okay, fair enough. I think I always thought the very interesting thing with the monarchy is the fact that they do actually possess a latent power, but we all know that if the power were exercised, then it would be stripped of them, and it would be stripped of all monarchies forever.
Which, incidentally, is the theme of King Charles III, the play that I read an extract from earlier on, that Charles tries to use power that he has a right to do, because he basically annuls Parliament, spoiler alert, in the middle of the play, which is within his right. And it creates a split throughout the country.
To do so. But even so, we all tacitly accept that such a thing would be, even though it is technically within their rights, such a thing would be an overreach that would be absolutely detestable and completely unpalatable for the entire public. And in many ways, I think perhaps a better historian could correct me on this, But I think that is largely down.
Don't worry, I will do.
Largely down to the legacy of our current monarch, in the fact that she never has.
Yes, it is perhaps one of the things that I think people find most attractive about her. The fact that we always have governments, we always have prime ministers, and, certainly from my own personal views and skepticism of government power, I can sympathise with this point of view. But, I mean, take the last few years with lockdown and everything like that. Whenever there has been an example of where government could use its power, or it could decide, no, that will be too tyrannical, faced with that binary choice, it is always chosen to use more power. And perhaps one of the things that is most attractive about Her Majesty, and is the thing that people find the most plausible about her, is that she could use power and decides not to. The fact that she has more power than she decides to use. And that level of restraint and, dare I say, humility in the face of what she actually possesses is quite an interesting thing to see in a person of that status.
Absolutely so, and I think and again by comparison, it's not like the Sultanate of Brunei or Saudi Arabia, where if at a moment, during COVID, they can retreat to their harems or create cities on a whim, do any number of crazy decadent things, which I think would warrant a revolution. But the fact that it's, as you said, she doesn't, and given how long her reign has been, I would hope, and I believe it will be the case, that at least for the rest of my temporal existence, the monarchs of this country will follow in that tradition.
And I don't think there is... Let's talk about that. I personally don't think there is a single chance of the monarchy being abolished. There is talk of the monarchy, of her being the last monarch. I don't believe she will be.
I hope she isn't. But to be fair though to the sentiment, I think because monarchy is inherently an irrational thing, I think it's totally okay for us to express very irrational feelings about it. And one of them is that I do have an irrational attachment to this, to Queen Elizabeth, and I think that's largely just due to the fact that she has been a constant throughout my entire life, throughout my parents' entire life, and in fact the majority of most of my grandparents' lives. She's always been there.
But that is atypical of monarchy.
And that is atypical, but she is like a greater grandma in a way. And I've spoken about this with friends, and particularly and it's interesting talking about it within international friends, because they can't seem to comprehend this, that if I search myself, I think I'll really actually be quite distraught when the inevitable happens, because precisely for that, because that constant will be gone. But
Well, no, I understand the sentiment. I do. My own personal feelings, though, are that, look, our monarchy has survived the Enlightenment. It survived the American Revolution. It survived the French Revolution. It survived the Chinese Revolution. It survived the Russian Revolution. It survived all of these eras. in which countries have dismantled or destroyed or executed their monarchies, and yet ours still persists. And I think that I don't really feel, when I look at the temperature of the country, a yearning desire to see her be the last. I think that if not Charles, then I think that Kate and William are exceedingly popular in the government's in the mind of the population. I think they're good ambassadors to the country. And I mean, even Charles with his, environmentalism and everything, I think that he's going to be a very different type of monarch. But I do think, nonetheless, I don't see him doing anything so catastrophic as to create the destruction of the monarchy.
And if anything, I mean, the funny thing with Charles is that certainly on some of those, he's actually been vindicated. I mean, certainly with regards to his, for many years in the press, he was lambasted for his obsession with organic agriculture being like a kind of weird eccentric quirk, whereas in actual fact, even now, like the issue of food security, one of the exacerbated by crises such as Ukraine, one of the really consistent things we're finding with it is lack of people getting access to potash and to artificial fertilizers and pesticides, which are now hard to supply and can derail food systems, and even when we do have them, have untested risks and aspects to our health. So I think as far as the whole organic thing, the organic biscuits that everyone always took the piss out of him for, he's actually been vindicated on. And again, in very much following the example of his mother, he hasn't been smug or snide about it. He's just accepted that with the same kind of, for lack of a better word, stoicism that has been.
It's been a dutiful son.
Dutiful, exactly.
It's been dutiful.
And it is one of those things. What is wonderful about the monarchy is the fact that it can fulfill so many roles. That it is like that kind of that greater sense of family that I alluded to earlier, just like great grandma. It's our birthmark, our broken nose, our sticky out ears.
Our quirk.
It's our quirk. It's the thing that makes us stick out, and then sort of related to that by extent, it's the thing that we can bitch and moan about. It's our scapegoat. It's our head teacher that we all make impressions about. But if that teacher wasn't there, we'd all feel like our life was a little less funny, a little less special. It's that thing I alluded to before. It's the constants. It's the living symbol of a continuity going all the way back to Alfred the Great. And even if the various different dynasties have changed,
yes,
it's still this idea that we're part of something bigger,
which I think we all desire to be, left or right, Republican, monarchist, conservative, socialist. I think it's human to aspire to be a part of something greater than ourselves, to be part of a grander narrative, if you will, in human existence. And I think the monarchy is a powerful tool in enabling that.
And it can wonderfully fulfill pretty much any desire that you can have on the spectrum, because if you're staunchly conservative, you can just look at it as they are the appointed by God, the lineage that has been unbroken since blah blah blah.
Very Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
very Aragorn.
You can be that.
As the seal does there.
But if you are a socialist, you can be pleased about how ineffectual our ruling class is. You can be pleased about how they don't execute people on a whim or raise up arms to go in and invade Ireland or France. It's a
It was an interesting point. So I was on Instagram on my Amiable Arguments Instagram earlier on. Go follow me. And but I was watching the Labour Party put out a post saying, "Oh, congratulations to Her Majesty, for 70 years and all those sorts of things." And I didn't skip a single comment in the comments section as I was reading through them. Every single one of them is negative. Every single one. And I appreciate the fact that, and not all of them are illegitimate. Some of them have genuinely legitimate criticism. And as I always aspire to do on this podcast, I try and find the truth in anyone's words. I try and figure out their angle, where they're coming from, why they believe what they believe. And I think that there is something in that. But for now, they are people who are angrily raging against a strong wind of royalist sentiment. And it's things like that make them unelectable, because they can't accept that just because they feel so strongly about something, the rest of the country does feel a different way. And I think that this comes to a thing of picking our battles.
Yeah. And it is one of those ones where I'm pleased, at least with this one, that it isn't so much a battle, because
it's been really refreshing.
We're having this conversation from Tooting, which, for those of you who don't
go any more specific, don't give them my postcode.
They don't get the VOD, but it's not. But for those of you, perhaps who aren't native to the United Kingdom, or for those of you who are but don't know London very well, Tooting is a very multicultural area, especially from it's heavily representative of the people of South Asian ancestry. And what is fascinating is on the way here, just seeing all the various different, at the Sikh gurdwaras and Polish delicatessens and Islamic learning centers and all these various different places that hail from different places, some that were colonized by this country and others that aren't, that there is still, all this red, white, and blue bunting and Union flags and well wishes that that very much fly in the face of this anti-British, anti-English intersexual narrative, that the idea that we must only view such an occasion as a celebration of everything we stand against, or something that divides us, something that elevates people to a position that they didn't earn, whereas in actual fact, the lived experience that I'm seeing is that conversely it's a unifying thing, and that is one of those things where Immanuel Kant once used the analogy of, if you were to, a pigeon in flight may think that it could fly so much faster if it didn't have all of its wind in its way, whereas in actual fact, that's what's keeping it in the air. And I think there is an element of, we might think that we could be so much more unified and closer and together if we didn't have such a quote-unquote antiquated system. But I think in actual fact, that is the kind of thing that can bring us all together. And the fact that you can, I love how ironically, I was on my way home from watching a play about Englishness, the terrific play Jerusalem, with my dad, and both of us wouldn't wish the monarchy away. And we were, we'd had a couple of drinks, as is our prerogative as Englishmen on this occasion, and we were on our way on the tube, and we were just having the giggles about just talking about about the Queen getting absolutely spannered and just, and just telling everyone what we really think. And I think that is a unique pleasure of the fact that we can appreciate the seriousness of the monarchy, and at the same time, it is that thing that we can just cut. It both is sacred in that it holds us together, and it's so not sacred in that we all accept that it is completely silly.
Well, I think that sounds... We're just literally coming up to the hour mark, so I think that's a really, really good place to end it on. So, Harry, it's been great talking to you in this particular podcast. Thank you for agreeing.
Likewise. Do you have any final words, but perhaps that we should tacitly wish to Her Majesty?
Who's the podcast host, me or you? Oh, it's me, Sam. I do actually. Which is that because as Harry stated, I came from a background of being quite staunchly Republican, and I think part of that was always my still remaining, but sort of more realistic love of Morrissey and the Smiths, and but also my dad had quite a profound, respectfully, abrasive view on for me on the monarchy, and I've come through my own particular just learning curve and listen to all sides of the argument on this thing, and I just like to say that if I have come from the polar opposite position to this one, then I think that represents that there is at least something there that is worthy of consideration, and that there is something that is, we could abolish it, but we would miss it if it was gone. And I think that when you consider the fact that Her Majesty has lived through, as you say, World War II, decolonisation, socialist Wilson, hyper neoliberalist Thatcher. She's lived through, she's been there since through the Falklands War. She's been there through mass immigration. She's been there through Blairism. She's been there through COVID. And her words, and she has always had words of wisdom. She has always, because to echo a very great philosopher and political writer that I adore, Edmund Burke, we are a contract between the past, the living, and the present. And that's what monarchy is. It is the past that we inherit, it is the present that we live with, and it's a continuation of an intellectual growth that we pursue into the ever-changing future. And so, Harry, thank you for being on with me. And I hope that all of you listening, whatever country you be in, will raise a glass, enjoy a bit of festivities. It doesn't even have to be just, for our monarchy or anything. Just enjoy the sentiment of good feeling about the country right now. And God save the Queen.
Long may she reign.